Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is Matthew, and I have a quick video today. And hopefully, when I say quick, I actually stick to it this time. I'm not the best at that. But a quick video just to show you a couple of new features in Virtual 1403. You can go back and check the previous Virtual 1403 videos, or if you have no idea what Virtual 1403 is all about, you can check Moshix's original video introducing it, which I will link down in the description below. But essentially, Virtual 1403 lets you print from your emulated mainframes in Hercules to this nice green bar PDF with the vintage 1403 font that is modeled on the real 1403 printer output. So what are the new features? One of them is probably going to be of interest to a lot of people. And the other is probably going to be of interest to very few people, but for those who need it, I think it's a really nice addition. So the first feature is printer profiles. Before, we had just one type of output. We had the one font on the one style of paper with that initial 5 lines skipped. We just sort of modeled everything on what a typical setup coming out of an MVS JES2 managed system would look like. But of course, there's a lot of different possibilities of paper you might have put in your 1403 printer. And then we've also added some font options here. So let me just walk through these really quickly. Basically, we have green bar paper, blue bar paper, which is the same thing but blue, but then also just plain paper if you just wanted to print something out on a plain white background. And for each of those, we have a no skip option. So again, the form control on a 1403 printer could be set up such that it automatically skipped certain lines on every page. That would either be specifically set up if you had a pre-printed form and you were just filling in essentially fields that were pre-printed on the paper form for invoices, order sheets, whatever you're using that particular printer and paper for. But then you could also have, for example, when you had numbered green bar paper like this, the 1403 would skip down to the first line above the numbered lines so that you could print your title line and then everything else would be in the numbered sections. But of course, that wasn't the only option, right? You might want to print and use every line of the page, and you just control by printing blank lines after your form feeds. Where you want the text to start, what you want to skip, perhaps especially if you're using the new plain paper background and you just want to be in control. So we now have an option where you can select a printer profile that will print on each of the 66 physically printable lines on the page, as opposed to skipping the first 5 and then being able to print on 61 lines of the page. And we will see this a little bit bigger when I demo it here. But in addition to that default font we've been using, we've added the font that was based on scans of the 1403 printer output, I believe at the Computer History Museum. There's a link to the source of this in the actually the config file and a couple other places in the source. But this is, again, an authentic 1403 looking font, but it is from the scans of real output. So you'll see it has some texture, and obviously it's a little bit heavier weight than the modern reconstruction of it. It has a very limited character set, which is actually very authentic to the standard A chain of the 1403 printer. It was missing the / and the ampersand, which would have been characters available on the A chain. I edited the font and took the in character and chopped off its little legs and then flipped the slanted part around. So we now have a / character that matches, but I do not have the capability of creating an ampersand that matches. So still missing the ampersand. If you know about making fonts and think you can sort of make one that is the shape of the 1403 ampersand, but has the texture of the ribbon and everything and that worn look to it, that would be nice. And then finally, I have what I'm calling the modern font profile. This is IBM Plex Mono. And this is the profile that will allow you to use mixed case letters. So this one will support both uppercase and lowercase letters. And it's a nice modern monospace font. This is actually the font I use in all of my terminals and for a lot of my monospace needs. And the fact that it's an open source font from IBM is sort of nice, and that we're sticking with an IBM font for this 1403 printer. Obviously a much newer font than when the 1403 was around. But it still has that IBM heritage, so I thought that was a nice touch. And it gives us the ability to print out both upper and lowercase if you're not wanting to be restricted to just the uppercase characters of a more authentic 1403 look. So that's great. We have these profiles. For every font, we have each available color, blue or green bar, as well as plain. And we also have the no skip option for each of those. So it's sort of a matrix of a couple of variables that are then just all of the permutations here are supported. So that's great. We have all of these. How do you use these? So you'll need a new version of the agent, and the latest version, there are binary releases available. We'll hit that in a minute. You can see in the sample configuration file that the virtual 1403 service gives you, there's now this extra configuration option, profile. And we're just setting it to default green by default. If you leave the profile line off entirely, you'll get default green. So this will still work with your old configuration file if you don't go in and add a profile name. And if you use a profile name that we don't recognize, we'll also just fall back on default green. So your job will still show up. You'll still get your PDF, but it'll just be the default green profile like it always has been. But if you want to change that, you can, again, go here for the options for printer profiles, and you can see the name you can put in. So, of course, default green, you can change that to default blue. You can just grab any of these names and put them in your configuration file, and your output should then be produced using that new profile. So let's take a look at this really quickly. I have my mainframe here. Class C is my virtual 1403 output. And if I submit this job, and if I go back here, I'll just refresh I'll go back to my page. So here's what I just printed. If I pull up that PDF, you can see that I've configured my agent to use the default plain profile. So now I'm just getting that nice plain white paper with all of my job output. And of course, I still need the tractor feed holes so that this paper will work with my mainframe printer. So those are profiles. Now, the other new feature, and I'm actually going to demonstrate this by just changing my message class from C to D. I actually have another printer configured on this mainframe. And if I submit a job to that second printer, which is my output class D, let's submit that. If I look over here and refresh, I have my new print job. And it's a different profile. So this is the retro blue profile. And here I can show you that font better. You can see that it has the texture of the ribbon and sort of the wear and tear over time of the characters. So they're not super perfect. This looks much more like real printed 1403 output would look. I think if you're going to be doing a lot of reading, right? If you're printing from your mainframe and producing these PDFs because you actually want output that you can reference and read through, I think the default font is just more readable. But if you're going for the authenticity, if you are just kind of using this for fun, like I often do to make these kind of cool looking green or blue bar paper mainframe printouts on the tractor feed paper. This retro font is definitely the look that you are going for. So we have that here, and you can see that I'm probably missing some characters here and there because, again, it's a very limited set of characters, just like the real A chain would have been, unless you bought a different chain from IBM that had additional characters. They had chains that they would swap certain characters for other characters. So I don't know, maybe instead of an asterisk, you could get like open parentheses, which I don't think are in this this set. So even something like COBOL code, I don't think the standard A chain had all of the characters that you could even use in COBOL. Like I don't think it has an equal sign, an equals character. Although if you look back at COBOL, in a lot of cases, like for conditionals, you didn't have to use the equal sign. I think you could write out the word equal, so then you'd be able to print out your code. So just be aware if you're using this, right? It has the alphabet A through Z. It has the numbers, 0, 1 through 9. And then it has the asterisk. It has commas. It has the /. There's a couple other characters that are in there, but not many. But that's in line with what a lot, kind of the limited character set that you needed for a lot of the programming languages that evolved from punched cards that also had a very limited character set. There wasn't a lot beyond the letters and numbers and just a couple of basic punctuation symbols. So the interesting thing there was, of course, I have these 2 printers and I'm only running one agent. So I have an agent that has the default input-output pair, which is essentially what we had before. We're now calling the default input, which is one connection to Hercules, and a default output, which is one connection up to the web service. But then I can also define as many additional inputs as I want, and the agent will go off and connect to whether they're different ports on the same system, like I have here. Port 1403 is one of my virtual printers for output class C, and port 1404, which is a different virtual printer for output class D. Those happen to be running in the same Hercules instance, but of course these could be pointing to different Hercules instances on the same computer or different computers. So I think there's someone in the mainframe Discord server who has virtual 1403 hooked up to tons of emulated mainframes that he runs, MVS systems, VM370 systems, MVS systems under VM370, all of those possibilities. And he was having to run multiple copies of the agents, right? The agent looks in its config.yaml file, and you'd have to make different directories with copies of the agent and different config.yaml files. So that can all be consolidated down to a single running agent now. And again, even if you're not wanting to connect to multiple different Herculeses or multiple different emulated mainframes, this capability by running multiple printers in your one mainframe is a way that you can say, I want just to have ready to go different output classes for different these different profiles, right? Sometimes I want retro font on blue bar. Sometimes I want the default font on plain. So you no longer have to run multiple agents to do that, especially now that we have this printer profile thing. You might want a couple of different profiles just ready to go for you. So I'll show you how that works really quickly. This is, kind of an advanced feature because you need to work with the YAML configuration syntax to make, the different configuration blocks you want. But you can download the latest version of the agent. So up here on the GitHub, you're able to go to our v0.3.0 release. And I'll download it for Linux. But again, we have it pre-built for Windows on Intel architecture. Both the new what are they calling them? M1 Max and the Intel Max, and then the ARM Linux and ARM Intel. So I'll grab the Linux AMD 64 here, save that, and let me quit this agent, and I'll just go ahead and delete that. So if I extract the new, it's under downloads, virtual 1403, yep, 030. So I'll extract the new agent. And if you look at the sample configuration file that we include, again, if you just want the basic use of this, you can, as always, just grab this sample that the web service creates for you. If you want to play around with a different profile, you can just change the profile name there, and that'll just work like it did before. You don't have to use this new advanced configuration syntax to set up multiple inputs and outputs. The way it used to work still works. That will just give you a default setup. But if you want to play with the new multiple input and output support, you'll want to dive into this new sample configuration file. And this will give you, I guess, even if you don't want to play with the advanced inputs and outputs, the documentation on the profiles is all here in the new sample config file. But of course, again, the only configuration line here is just profile and the profile name. But then the advanced configuration section talks about the multiple inputs and outputs. And it tells you that the input and output configuration above, so basically the way the config file always was, these are now called the default outputs and the default input. And you're able to add additional, here we go. You can add as many additional inputs as you want. So here's an example that would add an input named extra in 1 connected to port 1404 on localhost. And the output associated with this input is I just want to use that default output up there. So if you have a bunch of inputs, a bunch of Hercules printers that you all want to just send to the same profile up on the same web service, you're able to just reference a single output. You don't have to make a unique output per input. So in this case, we have extra in 1 would go to default, and that would be localhost port 1404. And then I have another input named extra in 2, and that is connecting to Hercules on a different system entirely and on port 1403. And this one, instead of going to the default output, is going to go to the extra out local output. So just like the inputs, you can see down here we have outputs where I have my extra out online output and my extra out local output. So this is the other capability. You might want some jobs to go up to the web service. Maybe you don't have the vintage 1403 mono font yourself, and so you want to use the web service where Moshix has licensed that font for use up there. But you want other output to go just to your local system and have the agent produce that PDF locally. Now the agent in local mode still supports all of those profiles. The only difference is the default font is going to be whatever font you say in font file. But if you use retro, the agent now embeds that retro 1403 scanned font. And then of course it also still includes, like it always has, the IBM Plex Mono font. So in local mode, you can use modern and get uppercase and lowercase letters in IBM Plex Mono. And if you don't provide a font file, the default will also give you IBM Plex Mono, just like it did before. So again, this is the YAML configuration syntax. You need to be careful when you're uncommenting these things and building these out. The hyphen here, the dash, starts a new entry. So there are 2 inputs here. Each input has a name, a Hercules address, and an output. And then you need the 2 spaces here just to keep the field names lined up. And then the dash, the hyphen here, is in the first column to start these entries. So if I actually wanted to use this, I would uncomment all of these lines. And if I start at my agent, it would now use this configuration. So of course we do keep these commented by default in the configuration file. Whoops. So they're just here for reference. But if that is something that interests you, again, you can go ahead and download the new version of the agent from GitHub. Of course, this is open source. All the code is here. It's written in Go. So if you want to just check out the code, check out the latest code and build it yourself, that's another way for you to get the agent here. And again, that sample configuration file is up here if you want to reference it. So I hope that is exciting for some of you. Again, I think the feature of general interest here will be a little more flexibility in terms of what you want your output to look like and if you want those first lines skipped or not. But then I know some of you who run multiple emulated mainframe systems, or if you are kind of an advanced user and you saw my previous video about setting up the different outputs, the different output classes so that you can have dedicated printers for Virtual 1403. Use sort of the similar approach. You're able to then set up multiple Hercules SockDev printers if you wanted to have the agent connect to those different printers and actually have these different printer profiles pre-selected. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to leave comments in the video. If you hit bugs or other issues, or I guess even just questions about how it works, you can also feel free to use the GitHub issues here. That'll ping me that there are new cases here, and I'll take a look and see if I can help. But otherwise, thanks for watching and have fun with all of the new capabilities of Virtual 1403.